Oh, good evening, everybody. Going to do a sort of post-dated review, really, of some magazines which came out all of 38 years ago. One very sunny afternoon when I was 22 years old, and bearing in mind at that time there was no internet, and there was well, no such thing as the kind of modern phones with cameras that we now have that you could use to access the internet that wasn't there. Most the books like Donald Featherstone, Terry Wise, the pictures were in black and white, and there was always Osprey, but they weren't, they were drawings, obviously paintings or whatever. And then miniature war games appeared on the scene, and it came out, as I say, in 1982. And for UK listeners, to put that into perspective, at the time of the Falklands War, when Mrs. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, and as I say, I was 22 years old, and I ordered all 7 issues that had already been published, and this particularly sunny, beautiful sunny day, I brought my parcel down of 7 issues, which I have here in front of the camera, and I opened the package, and I was face to face with this, a lovely, absolutely, I'd never seen anything like it before, full colour photograph of sort of 25mm figures, cuirassiers, carabiniers, or whatever, from the Napoleonic period. Issue 1 of Miniature War Games, and I looked at this picture. I mean, as I said, I'd never seen anything like it before. I mean, not in colour, not photographs, no internet, of course, so there was nothing to really access like that, and the magazine was full of all adverts which now seem, very quaint with hindsight, but minifigs, Jacobite miniatures, Heroics and Ross, which some of you remember, little strips of figures, 90p packs, 1/300th scale, or approximately 6mm, isn't it? Skytrex, another manufacturer with ships and figures, and more and more photographs all the time. Lovely pictures. Arena 4 War Game Show, September 1983 in Nottingham. Very quaint, and what I loved about the War Games magazines at this time was there was none of the well, I suppose, sophistication of today. It wasn't obscure battles or, like analysis of rules as such. It was people talking about meeting up with friends on a Friday night and playing war games, and sometimes staying over at each other's homes, and the camaraderie that went with all of that. And you had Peter Gilder's War Games Centre in North Yorkshire, and you've got in the picture there, I don't know if you can quite see that, but Peter Gilder, sadly now dead, playing on one of his tables, and the people used to meet up on the Friday, have lunch, play a war game, maybe Napoleonic on Friday, Saturday an ancient game, and then Sunday a World War II war game. And occasionally there'd be a trip to a local site of historical significance, maybe English Civil War or War of the Roses up in Yorkshire. And this is a lovely article, as I say, very kind of quaint, of a bygone age. I mean, it sounds strange talking about this. Is, as I say, I was 22 years old when I first opened this magazine, and yet it's very much as from another age. Lovely articles, full colour illustrations. I think they're still available on Amazon even, possibly with the exception of these first few issues, but you can get back issues £3 or £4 if you get one that particularly takes your fancy. A Plain Man's Guide to 15mm figure painting. It was all really very, very helpful. As I say, I pick up more recent issues. I mean, I'm not sure what there's Wargames Illustrated, I think, and Miniature Wargames, I think, is still going in one form or another. It started out, it was called Battle in 1970s. It was incorporated ultimately into Modeller's World, I think it was called, or Model Monthly, or something. Well, one of these titles. it didn't get the circulation at that time, and came with a kind of hex board game, and more pictures, more colour pictures. As I say, I remember staring at these, but it's very, very vivid recollection of staring for some minutes and hours even at these lovely photographs. Again, World War II featured heavily, encouraged me to buy an awful lot of these figures, German Army. Peter Lang, there's an advert, 15mm, he got me started in, well, I got started with sending off orders, I remember. Peter Lang, Minden, Sutton, St Nicholas, Hereford, on the Welsh border. The great thing about these figures were they weren't greatly detailed, so you, with a paint job, you could actually make an awful lot of them. You could make them go further. Irregular Miniatures is still going now. Advert for the Wargames Holiday Centre, Scarborough. Lovely photograph on the back there. Issue 2, yeah, I was very much encouraged by this to go into World War II collecting, not so much wargaming, but I collected significant number of German Army World War II figures, and again, very, very beautiful photographs, full colour, which, you know, my memory of the period seems to be black and white. As I say, books and everything seemed to be in black and white until this magazine came along, and even the magazines at that time were invariably very much in black and white. Article there on the Battle of Castellon by Terry Wise, who sadly has passed, and was a marvellous wargamer and author. Introduction to battle gaming, if you ever get a chance to pick up that copy. Wargaming with a Mongol army. Some more painting tips. They seem to be, you know, I know you can't repeat the same thing over and over again necessarily, but they were very, very useful. They seemed to, you know, be so purposeful. It seemed endless discussions of people about wargaming and their life in wargaming, and it didn't get too bogged down in super detail. It was telling you how to paint model soldiers and how to wargame with them, and I think sometimes it all gets slightly lost in very convoluted rules. I mean, I'll be honest, I picked up some 1983 advert for Salute, which was then held in Kensington Town Hall. I was going to say, I picked up a copy of Wargame magazine recently, and it was just, you know, it was full of graphs and charts, and I didn't buy it. I prefer to go through these. There's something gloriously inspiring. This, prior to YouTube, this was the place you wanted to be. Peter Lang's Franco-Prussian War range, 7p per figure. Renaissance range. And Wargames Research Group, Jacobite miniatures again, and quite a nice Zouave unit there. Draco issue 3, that appears to be Napoleonic. Irregular miniatures, Hinchcliffe, article on computer wargaming, from the Master's Brush. Again, very useful guides to paint. Oh, there's one even on horses, painting horses, which is a very exceptionally one of my many weak points in painting. Wargaming the Crusades, Prussian Dragoons from a 7 Years' War. Pictures were so evocative. I mean, you could just stare at them, as I did for an awful long time. And Dixon miniatures, samurai figures, armies of the wars in India, postal campaigns. There's a reader's letters stage there, which, if I remember correctly, used to get quite heated at times. People would criticise one another's rules and books, and they didn't hold back. Shogun range of figures by QT Models. Armies and Enemies, Wargame Research Group books, Heroics and Ross figures, vast range. Peter Lang again, Crimean War this time. And finishing off with a rather nice scene of, looks like Picton and Wellington and associated generals. Another eye-popping front cover. 75 pence for this magazine. Regular miniatures again, mini figs. We have a rather nice set of Normans. Armies of the Crusades, Battle of Murfreesboro, Landsnecks. I never knew how to pronounce that. Two more excellent scenarios of Napoleonics, and we're right up to World War II. Some American infantry. They did feature rules, and this was an article, Memoirs of a Wargamer, by a chap called Mel Gosling, and this was again very good on atmosphere, how we used to meet up, and they converted Airfix figures, you remember that, and all meet up at each other's houses, and you know, it seemed a simpler time, of course, as we always say. An anachronism permitted by the rules. Alexander's forces faced Persians of an earlier era. Warrior. Now, Warrior, this advert here, this is a company in Glasgow in Scotland, and this is particularly for samurai, but they used to do, well, back in the day, they used to do a complete British-French Napoleonic army, 4 regiments of infantry, 1 of cavalry, artillery and command figures for £11.95, when the going rate at that time was £25 to £30. You know, fairly decent, and you know, I remember I've still from this period, 1983, I've got a British and French army still in the packet. Wild West scene, cavalry surrounded by Sioux Indians. And this was the cover that really blew me away. I mean, bearing in mind my Sudan War's ongoing paint up at the moment, This was the cover that even then really took my eye. Peter Gilder's figures again, of the 80s, early 80s period. I thought this the backdrop was just stunning. Irregular miniatures, Napoleonic again. Peter Gilder describing the Battle of Leipzig as replayed at his holiday centre. Wargaming in 5mm. Battle of Maiwand, disastrous defeat of the British by Afghan forces. British Lancers from Peter Gilder's collection, and again, you know, I mean, the quality was marvellous. Wild West scenario. European Castle 25mm and Salute 83. Seems like 100 years ago now, doesn't it? You know, it's 38 years ago, which is in truth long enough, but it seems a long time ago. Some medieval figures there. Coming up to issue number 6, nearly finished, guys. I've got about I collected about 150 of these magazines before I started to tail off and just pick them up in W.H. Smith's in a more erratic fashion. But I've got the kind of the golden 100 certainly, which I got on subscription, and then I found it started to go off the boil a little bit, for me anyway. I mean, it's probably not less in quality, but different articles to what I was actually after. Gallia reproductions, Essex miniatures, Sudan wars. I had a few of them. Yeah, out of Canvey Island in Essex. I remembered going to their shop, which I think is still open. Peter Lang's 15mm Wargames figures. Yeah, as I say, a much simpler kind of set of figures, but nonetheless absolutely beautiful. Another standoff between Union and Confederates. American Civil War machine guns. Sicily after Dionysius. Fighting in built-up areas. Fantasy wargaming. And I believe that's English Civil War again. With an article by the diorama maker Ian Weekly. Another 2 pictures that, as I say, back in 1983 absolutely blasted my my eyeballs out of my head. I remember staring at these for such a long time. I did obtain many of these figures, paint them up. I've now sold them on eBay. Some regrets, as we all do. I mean, that was just as close as you could get to the real thing. I mean, it just looked so realistic. I mean, the massive dervish figures up here and assaulting the British Square. It was better than the best paintings. I mean, it just looked so superb and inspiring. The article is by Peter Gilder, detailing his visits to Donald Featherston in the 60s, and his development of a set of rules for both British colonial and United States versus Indians. Article on Tolstoy and morale. There you go. The melee in war games. Nuts and bolts artillery. And the Second Indochina War. And as I say, all very, very involving writing. I mean, it's actually very, very interesting, regardless of the period discussed. I suppose we're very blasé now with with what we've got on the internet. But this was the only way to get in touch with your fellow wargamers and figure collectors. There's the article there for Warrior. Complete 25mm Napoleonic army at 11.95. 4 regiments of foot and 2 of horse, plus a general. You had British, French, Russian, Prussian, Austrian and Spanish. 15mm armies were only 7.95. And as I say, this was a half or a third of what you could expect to pay from some of the other. I know some people said that their castings were simpler, not so many poses, but you got a lead army out of it, and that was pretty good. That was pretty good. Another one of their famous pictures at the back, just marvellous to stare at for hours, really. And finish up with the British Square. Up to issue 7 now, still in 1983, I believe. And yeah, we're going with minifigs and irregular miniatures. Model shops, which sadly have all gone the same way for the most part. I remember being bitterly disappointed going down to Peckham for Peckham. I think it was Peckham Rye Stamp and Model and Hobby Shop, and pressing my nose up against the window to see that it had been clearly closed for a number of years and no longer was in business. And you know, the internet, I guess that's the price we pay. The regular crossword, clearly didn't give that much of a go back in the day. Make your own wargame figures, part 2, the mould. I mean, Prince August used to be the go-to company for that sort of thing. I remember a few burnt fingertips and leaving blobs of lead on the kitchen cooker. This is the lazy way, a faster method of getting that painted army into action, an ancient Indian army there. With a complete, again, this, I had no interest whatsoever in armies of this period, Indian armies certainly, but the engaging way it was written, the wonderfully evocative and inspiring article that I actually did start painting a few ancient Indians, and that's what the magazine did to you. You know, it did then what the YouTube does now with all of you. It inspired, you know, it as I say, it was so uncommon to see gorgeous, sumptuous colour photographs. You know, it just didn't happen back then. It was very much a black and white world. And Ian Wheatley again detailing some of his works. Phil Barker, Andy Callan, all fairly well known names of the era and beyond. Someone there with an advertisement asking for Airfix HO00 soldiers. Early days of Aegean warriors. Lovely line drawings. And a Seleucid force, apparently. I'm not too familiar with them. But Figures and Terrain by Peter Gilder. Dixon Miniatures, Gallia Reproductions, Wargames Research Group, Warrior again, Jacobite Miniatures. A lot of these have faded. Heroics and Ross again, they used to cover absolutely everything. You know, the, as I say, 6mm high. Yeah, and just to finish up with another gorgeous photograph on the back of some Sherman tanks advancing up country, and yeah, that was Miniature Wargames, and that's the again, as I say, that's the one that caught my eye as I opened the package, and you know, on that day in 1982, 38 years ago, but seemingly 100 years ago, sitting with my parents in the communal garden of the flats. We were on a gorgeous September day, 22 years old, 60 years old now. I hope I'm doing the maths correctly, but that absolutely, even to this day, this photo is, I find it deeply moving and inspiring. But as a 22-year-old who had never seen anything of this ilk before, this was a photograph. It made you want to rush out, and even if you had no interest in Napoleonics or the French, you just wanted to get involved. But certainly the issue number 5 was what did it for me. I've never really turned away from this. This was the one that I remember spending many hours, and I did assemble a very large, relatively large force of Peter Gilder's connoisseur figures, and including a Sudan market village, complete with everyone, including an Arab lady of easy virtue, I think is the best way of politically correctly describing her, and sheep and bowls of fruit and fish on market stalls, and covered market stalls, and traders, and small boy running. It had the lot. Again, sadly, I passed it on to someone on eBay, and yet, you know, I did have them, and it's a good memory. And looking at these again, it's great to reminisce. I think I'll stop at 7. As I say, I've got 150, and I think 7's probably it's going to be enough for now anyway. But thank you for watching. I hope you've got some nostalgia and a bit of inspiration for these. I know I'm going to read them again. I haven't read some of them for well, the best part of 38 years. Just glad I kept them, I guess. Anyway, guys, thanks. Hope you're painting away happily and are all well. Thank you so much. Goodbye.